Now, our next speaker is not from Ghana. Like the minister said, he's from our big brother country, Nigeria. He's done so much for himself and for businesses, both home and abroad. As I was looking up his work, I also noticed that he's got some very interesting family background. How many of you have seen the 10 Naira notes, for those of you who trade in Nigeria? How many of you have seen that? You have? Oh, definitely. Well, the man on the note is his grandfather, and so I hear he has a lot of money. He owns all the 10 Naira notes in Nigeria. But ladies and gentlemen, he's done so much for himself, managing businesses, huge portfolios, and building careers as well. Let's welcome our next speaker. He is the CEO of Blackstone Equity Limited in Nigeria, Dr. Sam Ikoko, founder and CEO. Thank you very much, Doc. The podium is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to stand on existing protocols. The MC, I'm not very good at timing when I'm talking, so give me some signals, would you please? So again, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to address you today on a topic of great importance to the future of Africa. As we all know, financing rapid economic growth is one of the greatest challenges facing the continent today. And so I want to appreciate the organizers of this summit, because it's at fora like this that we can really accelerate knowledge and make progress. Thank you for inviting me. I am confident that with the right approaches, we can overcome this challenge and unleash the full potential of Africa's economies. The challenge with funding Africa has never been a lack of ideas. It's always been one of political will and implementation, especially against a backdrop of active resistance to the economic development of the continent by external shareholders and beneficiaries. Standing on the shoulders of those before me, my contribution is to underscore the emphasis placed on certain potentially useful ideas and introduce one or two more ideas that may be of relevance. Let me start by telling you that I have, and I believe I can add, why I believe I can add to this discussion. As Chairman and CEO of Blackstone Private Equity, not to be confused with Blackstone Group out of New York, we are unapologetically focused on Africa. That means we begin where the arguments against investing in Africa is concluded. As a result, we are focused on alternative financing strategies and mechanisms. We start by asking how African governments, businesses, and entrepreneurs can access pooled capital if they have to be subjected to inflexible regulatory rules designed for developed economies. I personally have been in this space for 30 years, and that means I have a pretty good idea of what I'll be talking about. I know we are aware of the fact, often repeated, challenges regarding growth finance in Africa, the need to improve the business environment, the need to foster political stability, the need to invest in infrastructure, promote regional integration, and so on. And while I agree, I believe what is important is how all of this should be funded. I have come up with 10 suggestions I would like to share with you at this summit. But let us first be clear about the role of government. We've heard the Ghana Investment Promotion Commission speak. Very good. We have the same with NIPC in Nigeria. And we want to see that some of these policies are really, really put into place as soon as possible. Government should focus on these policies and regulations to create the right environment for private sector investment in key sectors. It is also important to stress the active resistance from external funding sources for the development of Africa. We have to wake up to the reality that Africa's wealth human and natural resources, can only benefit the rest of the world if it is retarded in some way for as long as possible. Without sounding like a beret-wearing revolutionary, I think it's time for us to really wake up and try and do things ourselves here on the continent. I mean, how would you explain the fact that the largest funding sources in the world cite foreign exchange and country risks that include everything from corruption to terrorism for their reason to hold back investing into Africa? Yeah, it's true, these things exist. But according to the latest available data from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the overall default rate for DFI loans to Africa was 1.7%, which is lower than the average default of 2.5% for all developing countries in 2019. So the real question is, are we a good destination for investment or not? So I would like to suggest 10 things we can do to accelerate this fact. The first one is, we do know that 80% of all employment is driven by the SMEs. But where international investors are concerned, there's silence on African SMEs. We're always looking for the big names, big brands who can bring in all the money. But what about our people back home who really drive the economies? And I'm suggesting that there should be a global business and news network with an Africa First perspective. Put on any television set today, you're going to see statistics about foreign companies, how they've grown, what they've done. But look at the great work we've done in Africa. Nobody knows about it. You go and sit on some of the boards of the big companies, they're ignorant about Africa. They have money to spend, but all they hear is the bad news about Africa. Why don't we give them access to hear for themselves and see the good work we've done? So developing global media is not something, this is one area that should be counted as infrastructure. Government should invest in making sure that the African perspective is known. The GIPC has just spoken to us, at best 100 or something people. There's a population of 7 billion that needs to hear the story about the opportunities in Ghana, in Nigeria, in Cote d'Ivoire, everywhere else. So this is infrastructure. This is not just a business. For Africa, governments must make sure that our story is told. Our people should be acknowledged the way we acknowledge entertainers and politicians and give them awards. The small and medium businesses should be recognized. They drive the economies. And quite frankly, when we talk about raising money, charity should begin at home. The laughable exercise we just had in Nigeria in trying to change the currency showed us that people have trailer loads of cash buried somewhere. Hernandez de Soto, the Peruvian economist, gave us statistics to show that we have more money buried under our mattresses than all the foreign aid that's come into Africa since 1956. So the money we want is under our mattresses. How do we get it out? We need to know that we are worthy to be invested in. That's critical. It will provide more visibility for African businesses. It will help counter negative stereotypes and biases about Africa. An example will be letting the boardrooms of the world know that the default rate in Africa is lower than all other developing countries. I think that's information worth sharing. Secondly, we need a new generation of capital market products on top of an African stock exchange with unified regulations. I can't tell you how many times we funded a business and then we have to float them on European stock exchanges, on Asian stock exchanges. We need to have something in Africa. So Africans in Nigeria can invest in Ghana. They don't have to come through the GIPC. They can look at a Ghanaian company that's doing well and invest in it, and vice versa. Take out all this separation we have between Anglophone and Francophone countries, unify the regulations, and let the money move around. Not only is our default rate less in Africa, our our profit growth is faster than anywhere else. The third thing would be capital inflows from Africa diaspora. Everybody says that. How do we do that? You talk to the average Nigerian, Ghanaian, Gambian or Liberian or anyone else in America, the first thing they'll tell you, I can't invest at home. I'm not sure my money will be used properly. I sent money the other time, it was used for something else. So mechanisms have to be set up where Nigerians, Ghanaians, everyone should know that there's a certain amount of scaffolding that protects them when they start investing at home. And there's a lot of money there. 2018 or so, 80% of all foreign investment into China was from Chinese living abroad. The statistics we have here are equally daunting. For example, we have, according to the World Bank, remittance flows to sub-Saharan Africa increased by 5.6% to 51 billion in 2022, up from 48 billion. It's growing, driven partly by the fact that Africans are doing well abroad and also by the fact that more Africans are traveling every day. And our culture is that we remember home. We may not be there, but we can send money home. And it's happening. The fourth thing I'd like to talk about is what I call Project Wakanda. How many of you watched the movie Wakanda? Everybody was proud about Africa. Well, let's turn that into economics. According to recent data, the total net worth of black Americans alone is estimated at over $4 trillion. 4 trillion. By tapping into this massive pool of capital, African economies can gain access to the funding they need, period. Project Wakanda should involve the creation of financial instruments that give confidence to investors, can trigger the brain gain. For a change, let's have a brain gain, where we can prioritize the participation of all blacks in procurement of consulting, engineering, and other opportunities that can help drive the success of African businesses. The fifth would be accelerate public-private partnerships. It's not a new idea, and we all know what these things can do. In 2019 alone, total value of PPP projects in Africa reached $31.8 billion. As of 2020, just 1 year, the World Bank says it jumped to $170 billion, spread over 335 active public-private partnership projects in Africa. It's a great opportunity to move forward, and we should encourage them. In Nigeria, I've seen where the infrastructure concession has made it a little bit, I won't say cumbersome, but not very articulate on how to pursue these PPP projects. You can't have the same time, you can't have the same methods for road construction as you would have for education, for example. So we should be flexible and make it easy for these PPPs to take place. The sixth one is just to leverage regional competitive advantage. We don't need to take money and put it into every country in Africa. Let money go where it has competitive advantage in Africa. This concentrated capital, for example, in West Africa, agriculture, natural resources. Southern Africa, mining, industrialization. Eastern Africa, science and technology, telecommunications. When you focus capital based on regional competitiveness, what happens is that you have existing data, existing track records, and reduced resistance to investing. Prioritized investment in intra-African transport and haulage. Everybody knows that. The Trans-Africa Highway Network, which spans 57,000 kilometers, has the potential to boost trade and economic integration. But there's more to that. Improving transport infrastructure and reducing trade barriers has the potential to significantly increase the trade, but to do a lot more than that. Remove the boundaries, make it possible for our investment pools to increase, our investment opportunities to increase on the continent. And maybe some of you who have money under your mattresses might decide to bring some of it out. We must build Africa's military-industrial complex. What has this got to do with economic development? Think again. If you notice how places like the Democratic Republic of the Congo cannot find money to have systemized, organized, large-scale industrial mining, but can find the equipment to fund armed conflict, it's very troubling. But since African governments must also spend on security, then building military-industrial complexes can be a strategic move for African economies to spur growth and development. These companies focus on the production of military equipment and technology, but they also have the potential to boost education, research, and design of consumer products, thereby creating jobs and driving economic growth. We have examples in Egypt, South Africa, Brazil, India. But for lack of time, I'll just skip over that for now. Create a tax haven within Africa. It's not enough to say, oh, people are stealing money and the money is going out of the continent and all of that. Well, how can we also have structures that can help keep some of that money here? And one of that would be to create a tax haven within Africa. Why should the money sit in Panama? Why should it sit in Guyana? Why should it sit in Switzerland? Why can't it sit somewhere in Africa? By creating a tax haven within Africa, countries can offer incentives to businesses to invest, such as lower taxes, tax exemptions, and so on. But please, let's not confuse tax havens with free trade zones. They're not the same thing. And finally, I think private equity companies in Africa should truly embrace the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. This agreement represents significant opportunity for Africa-focused private equity firms to drive rapid economic growth. If we can work together across the continent, we can increase the pool of capital, increase the value of what we do, increase the liquidity of our portfolio investments, and share deep knowledge hidden in the private equity companies because of their broad portfolio that can help develop the general economy. If there's time during the discussions, maybe we can all discuss preparing for a world where there's a de-dollarization of foreign reserves. That would be interesting for Africa as well. So I want to thank you so much for listening to me. I believe the notes will be available in the communique, and I'm available during panel discussions to take any of this to a logical conclusion. So I have put these ideas together for us to consider, but I hope I have made the point that going forward, it is the private sector which must roll up its sleeves and get to work. The rewards are well worth the effort. Thank you very much.
Come on, let's do it better for Dr. Sammy Koko. Thank you very much, Doc. A lot for us to chew on, and hopefully when we have the panel discussion, which is just about now, I'll throw a lot more questions at you. I'm interested in the global media network that you mentioned, because just last week, the School of Communications at the University of Ghana released a report on the state of the Ghanaian media. And the verdict was that the media is not financially viable. Now, we had a conversation on the back of that, spoke to colleagues, media owners in other parts of the country, and the story is pretty much the same. Slightly better for South Africa, for Kenya, but pretty much the same everywhere else. And so how can we do this? How can we change this around? I have no doubt about the potential of the media to revolutionize the economy of Africa, but how exactly do we do that? And I'll be taking your thoughts when we start the panel discussion, which is just about now. But let me announce that a black Nissan vehicle is blocking our minister from moving. So if you want to kindly attend to your vehicle, 376318, 376318, a Nissan car, black Nissan car, kindly attend to your vehicle so our minister can move. Thank you very much. And so we're moving to the panel discussion now. And once again, I have the privilege of inviting Dr. Sammy Koko to be on the panel. Put your hands together for Doc as he joins us. And would also be joined by the Director, Investor Services at the Ghana Investment Promotion Center, Edward Ashon Latte. Is Mr. Latte here? So Mr. Latte will join us shortly. I'll be moderating this session, and so it's just going to be, for now, myself and Doc would have a good time because he has a lot to share with us. My name, by the way, is Ernest Mino. I work with Joy News and Joy 99.7 FM, subsidiaries of the Multimedia Group. Doc, I wanted to start on that note of the media, and forgive my bias, everyone, but I think it's a very important point that you mentioned. How do we change the narrative? How do we make the media viable? I mean, we are here and we definitely know about global networks and how the West is using that in its development narrative. But because of the lack of resources, the lack of funding and investment in the media, not just in Ghana, but in Africa, we are not just losing resources, human resources to the West, and if the BBC gives me an offer today, I'm sure I'll jump at it, but we are also not telling our own story. How do we deal with this?
Well, thank you very much for that. Ordinarily, I would say the train already left the station. Because what we have now is what we call mom and pop journalism. Everybody's blogging, everybody's driving some information on social media. And that will continue. It's the nature of the beast, as it were. But that's the reason why in Africa, I call it part of the infrastructure, where government has to be the one driving the media, or create tax incentives to make it easy for organized media organizations to cover the economy. Focus on the SMEs. Focus on government programs that are working. Identify the people who are doing well so they can inspire the rest of the nation. The last thing Africa needs is to get depressed because the West has an inflation problem. The last thing we need is to start driving our economies based on what we hear of CNBC or Bloomberg, because the data indices and especially the culture is not the same. But to do this today, we have to try and revive government-driven media organizations, but with an entrepreneurial bent. And it's not just in media, sorry to say, it's across the board. Right here near this hotel is a building that's not being used that used to belong to Ghana Airways. We have the same situation in Nigeria. Why should a building be sitting empty when the youth in this country are looking for shared working space, they're looking for short-let office places? That's the kind of eddies that create things to happen. Government has to begin to think in that way. In fact, I think more entrepreneurs should be going into government than politicians. But it's the same across the board. So I hope I've helped.
Well, that helps, but I also want to take the thoughts of Mr. Latte on this, especially because you mentioned that government must be deliberate about it. I'm not sure what the level of interest in the media is. As far as the GIPC is concerned, do you have people walk up to you? And what packages there are, really? Because we have government, and I don't know about the GIPC, but I know about the tourism ministry. You place very expensive ads on the CNN. I see that. None of it comes to local media. Why is that? And how can we deal with this?
Thank you very much. I'll speak for GIPC. At GIPC, we have a very good relationship with the media because we consider the media as one of our key stakeholders in selling Ghana to the rest of the world. We constantly engage them. We have special interactions on an annual basis, which our PR team drives. But on the media as a whole, I think that we all need to work together, understand each other, so that whatever message we send out there will reflect what is actually going on. So GIPC, we involve them, and when it comes to media space, they will agree with you that we do give them some mileage in terms of what we put out there to advertise. And if you look at videos growing in Ghana and the others, we involve the media a lot in this. So for us, the media is one of our key stakeholders, and will continue to work to deepen this relationship, because without them, whatever we do, whatever we achieve, nobody will hear about it. I think the other panelists mentioned that during his presentation, and so we take the media seriously, and we'll make sure that we work with them to achieve our objectives.
And you talk about the new opportunities, for instance, in the climate sector. It looks the potential is great over there, but we don't see a lot of businesses going in there. Tell us generally about the risks involved in businesses, especially from the Ghanaian perspective, and what really is the plan to deal with this?
Thank you very much. One of the major risks when it comes to doing business is the lack of knowledge. If you don't understand a particular sector, or you don't have information on what is out there, it will be risky to you, to borrow the word risk, to venture into that space. So the important thing is to understand the game. If not, there are specialists who can help you to understand that. That is on the personal level. Of course, there are some global forces also that we need to deal with. If you look at the global economic space, anytime there is a crunch, we all feel it. And sometimes people lose out, but that doesn't mean that they should stop there. Sometimes you need to reinvent or reposition yourself. And so on a constant basis, you need to be looking for new information on new opportunities and the likes. Of course, I mentioned carbon credit. We've all heard about carbon credit, but now the thing is, how do you take advantage of the carbon credits? And we have the Ministry of Environment, and that's why I say, look for the specialists, engage them so that you know how you can benefit from some of these opportunities. Carbon credit, I won't say I'm an expert when it comes to carbon credits, but if I really want to maximize the returns or benefits that the carbon credit program has to offer, I'll run to the Environmental Protection Agency and the ministry, understand it, and then look at the next steps. So in terms of risk, knowledge is key to minimize the risk. Of course, for the global pressures, if inflation or currency and the likes, and we've heard about the Ukraine war, its impact on us, those ones, yes, we need to see how best we can deal with it. But risk in general is part of business, and we just have to find innovative ways to mitigate the impact of these risks on our businesses. I think I'll say that for a start, and then as we go along, we'll share other ideas on the risk that we have.
And I'll come back to you, Mr. Lartey, because we want to know what are some of the most promising sectors that people who are gathered here today, for instance, can decide to venture into. But having worked in Nigeria, would you want to attempt that question about the promising sectors in Africa that we really need to push the resources into?
Yeah, well, there are so many areas in Africa. The question is, which ones are going to give us the most leverage, especially with the fact that we have a teeming population. We're going to be about 1.5 billion in the next few years. We have the social media, which is a good and a bad thing, because it's completely discombobulated everything. Everybody's doing their own thing. So I think that where we should invest is in, first and foremost, is in areas of the economy that help the youth to generate and market ideas. That means starting from the educational system to change the way our people think, to change what we teach them in school, to give them opportunities. Africa, being young, should drive inclusiveness. Women in politics, women in business, women in... I think the whole world has a lot to learn from us. But when it comes to actual manufacturing and stuff like that, it has to be based on competitive advantage. Why would I may have deposits of gold, but if all the gold I have and I can mine for 10 years is not up to what someone in South Africa can do in 1 month, I will concede money for mining to the guy in South Africa for now. Let what I have represent reserves. Okay? The same thing with agriculture. So agriculture is always a winner. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced the magic of putting one seed in the ground and having a full harvest at the end of the season. That's true wealth.
Let me just ask the question. Any of us tried farming, gardening, anything here? Have we, by hands? Okay, I see a few hands.
Yeah.
So probably you can relate with what Doc is saying.
That's true wealth. And whether we're doing it directly or investing in agriculture, that's something we should do. I personally don't believe in esoteric things like carbon credits. I don't. I've had Germans come, want to use it for housing and all of that. It's not very transparent. And what does it got to do with Africa anyway? What am I doing saving the environment? I have coal. I'm sitting on top of coal. I need to fire it up to generate electrical power. And I'm sitting down here and I'm waiting for someone else. We just finished COP23 in Egypt. The Western world has promised us a ton of money for the environment. And after the discussions and the photo ops, there's no one to call.
And some have said this carbon credit market is perhaps the way of financing climate change events and perhaps bringing the money back.
We've heard many such things in the past. We want to see results. If I came to you and asked for money to feed my family because I had a business I wanted to do, and you said you're not going to give me the money because it doesn't meet your ESG framework, for example, I don't see how fair that is. I'm not saying it's not good, but I'm saying that Africa should keep looking. When you go for all these summits and conferences, push our perspective, push our opportunities, push the things we have to do. There's a lot of manufacturing that can be done in Africa. Africa is importing 90% of its furniture needs from the West. 90% of the major thing for the furniture is wood. It's coming from Africa. So I think we should have this sit together, all of us in Africa, and have a bit of coffee and wake up and just look at the situation the way it is and address it for a change. Very smart, very energetic, very powerful people, but we keep having these discussions. It's time to get some results.
It's time to invite another panelist. Dr. Daniel Macaulay was supposed to be with us, but he sent a representative, and I understand he's here. If you may join us, please, upstage. Oh, our very own Prof. Put your hands together for Prof. Professor Ernest Kofi Abochi is the Dean of the UPSA Law School. Prof, apologies. Thank you very much. And once I have a familiar face on the panel, then you're not going to like me, Prof. I'm going to put you on the spot many times. Please forgive me. But I want to stay with you, Doc, on some of the suggestions you made. It was intriguing to find that you say we have the DFI reduced to 1.7. If in fact in Ghana it's gone lower. Is that not an indication that Africa is doing well for itself? And so why is that not translating into economic prosperity that we all desire?
It's a good question, because take most of African businesses. They're spending part of the profit that's supposed to even out as quality of life for our people is being spent on debt servicing. All right? You bring in foreign investment agencies into Africa. They say, we're going to give you $50 million, we're going to give you $300 million. They spend 80 or 90% of that on consultants that they bring. So we are essentially at the business end of a trickle economy. We're not getting anything. If someone says he's coming now to Ghana Investment Promotion and he says he's bringing in $200,000 and they say, okay, you can bring it in form of equipment, and it goes all around Europe and picks dead equipment and refurbishes them and puts them on a ship, and then we give value to the equipment that's beyond what it really is. And then now it's time to repatriate profit. They're taking profit out. There's nothing there. When you go and say to them you want a finance lease, you'll get it. When you say you want an operating lease, you won't get it. It's all about the money. If you ask someone, look, give me equipment today on lease, and when you have an upgrade mine automatically, it's not going to happen. So there are many issues we have to address quite realistically to make it work. A lot of money coming into Africa I'm in the private equity space. People bring money in to buy medium-scale boutique hotels. They're generating a ton of money. On the contracts, they have service agreements, they have intellectual property agreements because you put their sign on the wall. And by the time it's done and you remove salaries, there's nothing left for the local investors. But that's the thing we should be looking at, because when a local investor makes money, he can invest into something else. So I'll just leave it there for now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Doc, on that. But then it leaves us with the question of the currency in which we are trading, because that is a huge factor. It erodes the gains that we are making eventually. But America, for instance, despite its debt, Prof, it doesn't need to pay its debt because its debt is in its own currency. The global economic structure is designed to favor the West. And so irrespective of how much we are doing, as the picture suggests in terms of the numbers, it will come down to these. And in the last few months, Ghana's own economic issues has largely been as a result of the depreciation of our own cedi. And so how do we walk this tight economic rope? How do we liberate ourselves, so to speak, from this? Because it's a global system, it's a global structure, and we need to find our way out of it.
Well, thank you very much. Well, first of all, I do not represent Dr. Macaulay, so nothing I say bind him. It's me. Well, thank you for the question. I think it's important, first of all, for us to remember that the global structure we have today is largely a reflection of the Second World War. The Second World War ended, a certain global economic architecture was put in place. The World Bank, the IMF, liberated Europe, and then afterwards they became essentially for the world. The US dollar has become the most important trading commodity in the world today, again, largely because of geopolitical dynamics of oil in the Middle East, which now, from the look of things, with the formation of the BRICS, among others, there appears to be some shift. The reality, however, is that we are still not going to witness a new major currency that would compete with the US dollar, certainly not in the next 20 years, realistically speaking, because the dollar has been so hegemonic and so strong that even currencies like the UK pound, which is even stronger than the dollar, is not globally that attractive as a medium of trade as much as the dollar is. But for those of us in Africa, we should be interested in one particular thing. And here's what I say. We have had the Pan-African Payments and Settlement Systems, the PAPS, recently designed and implemented. And the reason it was designed and implemented was to free African trade of its dependence in the on the US dollars, or the US dollar. It has been estimated that every year Africa loses, and listen, $5 billion in forex losses as a result of the medium of exchange of the dollar being the instrument or the currency of trade. So every year, because traders across the continent, someone in Ghana trading with someone in Togo would have to go look for dollars in order to be able to trade. The exchange differential, the losses alone, African countries lose $5 billion every year just because of this. So freeing ourselves of the dollar dependence is a necessity. It is not a luxury. But necessity itself also has to involve sacrifices, and we have to walk the talk. This is one of the things that all of us gathered here today would have to reflect on. The beautiful conversation we have on this platform, the question we ask ourselves is, to what end? When we are done and we leave and we have tea and we have corridor conversations and then goodbye and then back to the old days. The PAPS has been in operation for perhaps a little over around 2 years. And already that mechanism is suffering in a significant way because banks and African banks are not willing to use the PAPS, the payment system in which a Ghanaian trading with someone in Zambia doesn't have to look for dollars. You basically move from this side of the world with cedis, and then they meet you from the other side of the world with kwacha, and everybody uses their own currency of trade, and things work smoothly. African banks are not cooperating, and they are still very much fixated on this dollarized economy, which apparently, obviously, is hurting us, but which clearly, maybe for certain banks, bottom line themselves. And let's be honest, some banks also benefit from this. You know, it's not entirely an entirely losing game for African banks. But the truth of the matter is, overall, African economies continue to hemorrhage and lose in significant ways because of this dependence on the dollar. And I think your question just hammers the point home. But there's no way we can overcome it if we do not walk the talk. If we have PAPS and we'll meet and still talk about all these beautiful things, but we do not do the fundamentals, we are not going to get there. Africa's economy has been estimated to be 3.3 trillion annually. That's Africa's GDP. And this is the conservative state. This is Africa's GDP when Africa's overall intra-African trade is hovering around 16%, when the global average is in excess of 50%. Africa's participation in global trade is 3%. For a continent that harbors the substantial numbers of commodities, I mean global commodities, we have all the lithium you can think about, which is supposed to power the next generation batteries and AI. We have all the important things that should drive global trade, and we participate at the WTO level 3%. So Africa has no choice but to trade among itself. And among ourselves, we are trading around 16%. And so the only way we can really overcome this barrier of global dependence on the dollar, which continues to impinge on us significantly, our debt is in dollars. And our debt continues to balloon and spiral out of control. A lot of people are not talking about this, but the reason Ghana is at the IMF today is largely because we have a debt scenario which is unsustainable, not necessarily because of the quantum of debt, but because the debt grows by the minute. And it grows not because of the interest, but it grows because of the denomination of the debt. So these are structural complications that African countries continue to, we tend to reflect in a similar way. Virtually all African countries have the same similarity of difficulty. And it's about time that we look at these things and not just have, beautiful conversations. I like beautiful conversations. But if it ends at the table, this summit will be somewhere else next year, and we'll repeat the same conversation. And in some ways, it doesn't become helpful.
And so we have PAPS, and then we have, let's put our hands together if you want to. And so we have PAPS, and now we have AFTA. And just last week, your boss, GIPC, Yofi Grant, was in Cape Town. There was a conversation there about AFTA and its potential for Africa and all of that. It means that, though, the issue is not about lack of ideas, as you intimated earlier. It is the lack of the political will, as Prof is alluding to. But how do we get there? If we have regional bodies, if we have regional bodies and all these sub-regional bodies, we're supposed to have had one currency for West Africa, I think, and Africa as well. We don't know where all of that is headed. Is it time that businesses begin to take a more strong position on this issue if our government won't?
Well, first of all, I must say the PAPS is one of the most brilliant ideas I've come across, an idea whose time has come, is overdue. The problem with that is it's mathematical. If I'm trading with someone in Zambia, let's take the dollar out of it. What is the basis of our trading? There's got to be some number, some algorithm of some sort that will make me know that as a Gambian I'm getting good value, or as a Zambian I'm getting fair value. And that's the reason why we keep falling back to the dollar. So This problem has to be solved, but it has to be solved pragmatically, and it has to be solved as soon as possible, but it's not going to happen overnight. Okay? In trying to really resolve this, I think what we should do is look at our regional banks. We have commercial banks in Nigeria operating in Ghana. We have Ghanaian banks operating, I think, in other places, and so on and so forth. Each of these banks is representing its shareholders. And to some extent, sometimes, depending on where you stand, the values or the systems or the output or the requirements may not be the same for everyone. So we have to look at our regional banks. ECOWAS, for example, has a regional bank for, I think, development and whatever. Nice building in Togo. Very nice building in Togo. But I don't think that's what the building was for. I'm sure you have something similar in East Africa. It's time to see a rise of this, because these are the people who can create an algorithm that doesn't necessarily have to be currency-based, but allows us to determine the value of trade we're having in Africa across currencies. I favor 2-3 currencies in Africa, for example, as a good start, but who's listening to me? You know, so that's really the point. We have to really sit together and literally do what the young crown prince in Saudi Arabia did. Lock all the big politicians to one hotel and say, you're going nowhere until we solve this problem. And as funny as it sounds, it's something similar that we have to do. The dollar has become a way we all count our own profit. You know, the figures that Prof gave, very nice figures, but totally incomplete. When you add the number of parents who are using foreign exchange to pay for fees for their students abroad, whew. When you look at the fact that all of the African GDP is less than the Black American economy, so there's a lot of work to be done. And I agree with Prof 100% and everyone else here that it's time to roll up our sleeves and come up with something. It may not be perfect the first time, but what we need to let African economists know is this: failure is an acceptable byproduct of experimentation.
He deserves a round of applause. And so I'll come to you, Mr. Lartey, as we wrap up on this conversation, and I'll just go around on this. Again, to quote Professor Abochi, beautiful conversation. We need to start from somewhere. From the investment promotion angle, what is it that we can do that can rapidly bring us to that point? Because point is, we need to leapfrog. If we're not going to take those rapid, drastic steps, it will take years for us to do so. And we are at a very critical juncture in the history of the world, in the history of Africa, and we need to do something. From your perspective, what can we do? And I'll just go around on this, Prof. I'll come to Doc again.
Thank you very much. My take on this is that we must look at the fundamentals. Doc talked about comparative advantage and looking at the resources that we do have. We need to really dive deep, talk to the practitioners and find out what they think we can do to sustain the gains that we've made. If it's not profitable to process a particular commodity at this point in time, I don't think we should waste resources. I mean, going to that angle. Let's look at where we can, build on and have sustainable gains. Then we can look at how we can drag the others along. So dialogue, yes, we always talk, but at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we start something so that next time around we can say that, well, GIPC, we engage these people. This is what we did for them, and this is where we are. Talking about the youth, we started this laudable program of the Young Entrepreneurs Forum. Now we have the Ghana Youth Authority and the others joining us. We have the practitioners offering mentorship programs, and I'm just using this as an example. But then the next thing is, after teaching them all that, how are they going to get funds to really set up the businesses? Now we talk a lot about startups. The ecosystem is growing, but they need support. So these are some of the areas that I think we can look at to really provide the needed support. Once they take off, I believe that we can build on that, and then others will follow. So it's a two-way thing, and we must also manage our expectations given the situation in which we are, and we cannot just copy something from somewhere and hope that if we implement it fully, it's going to work. That is my take, and I believe that most people who've tried to implement foreign policies or ideas, 100% have had hiccups along the way. So let's look at our situation and then build on it. There's no need to, let's say, feel shy about, well, this man did this thing, but for me, I think I can start from point A instead of the other man starting from point C. It all depends on our strengths and how we can move forward. If you don't build a solid foundation, you can go up there, but the slightest shock, you come crashing down. So I believe in having a solid foundation before we look at the next steps. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we've been at this for a while. Prof, I'll take your final words on this, but I wish that you could also touch on the legal regime as well. Do we have favorable laws that facilitate all these trade, investment, partnerships that we talk about? If you've taken a cursory look, what are your thoughts?
But before I touch on the legal thing, if you allow me, I think that Africa's lack of strategy is also a problem. Many parts of the world these days have strategic plans to respond to the world. If you have no strategic plan, you become a receptacle of things happening. You do not have your own plan of reaction. And I tell you this, does Ghana...
Before you move on, in Ghana, for instance, we've had our development plan.
Well, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about strategic plan.
How different is that?
Well, the difference is that the strategic plan responds to happenings and events around you. So, for example, did Ghana have a Brexit strategy plan? Now, lately, the UK has been a darling boy of Ghana, and I'm sure many people may not have realized that part of the reason is because they are looking for external markets outside the EU because of Brexit. We could have been preparing for Brexit, because that meant we would have had a dual approach to Europe, one for the UK and the other for the EU. Does Ghana have, for example, an American strategic plan? Now, that's an important one. I'm saying this because of geopolitical tensions, the US, for example, has been recrafting its own economic relationship with countries around the world. So, for example, they have developed a new concept they call the nearshoring. So, formerly they will call it offshoring, where they send investment abroad. And China became the biggest recipient of that. The US-China situation, which everybody knows, has resulted in the situation in which Mexico, which formerly had American investment, which were sent to China, is now beginning to welcome American investment. And it's been estimated that with the sheer volume of American companies that are relocating from China to Mexico, Mexico may overtake China as the manufacturing hub of the world in the next 5 years. The point I'm making to you is, Ghana should have its own, and Africa should have its own investment strategy, because many countries, because of their internal politics, are now beginning to reflect various dynamics of investment. So in the US, if you are an aspiring president and your message is that you're going to send jobs abroad, you're going to invest in other countries like China and Co., of course you're losing. You have to convince the American people that you are bringing their jobs back to them. And what that meant is that not only are you even nearshoring, but you're literally actually localizing. With AFCFTA, many companies will now have to do location within Africa to take advantage of the rules of origin. Under the rules of origin, you will not be allowed to trade within Africa unless the goods in which you are trading originated from Africa. So that is an investment strategy. What that means is that if you're an investor, you can't just be in China and export. You will have to pay tariffs at the borders. To avoid the tariff difficulty, you will have to locate on the continent. It's an investment inducement strategy, and my very good expert on investment here, knows all about that. There's no need to talk about the detail. But the truth of the matter is, we need to have the kinds of strategies that, one, attracts investment, Two, respond to global geopolitical things happening, some of which present risk, for which we must have countervailing strategies. Others present opportunities, for which we have to exploit. Very often, we're just very happy to receive the fallouts of these complicated global geopolitical tensions, either in the Middle East. BRICS, for example, present its own investment opportunity. And we would have to harness that. But I'm just putting the issue out there because you're asking for wrapping up on this and there's no time. But I'm just putting the issue out there that we cannot do well if all we do is to reflect things happening as opposed to being strategic beneficiary of that. China benefited from America's high wages because in the US you have to pay, what, $10, $15 and more. Now it's in some places even $100 an hour. And China, people were ready and prepared to accept $2, $3 an hour. Skills level comparative. The reason Africa may have Chinese wage level benefits but did not attract the same level of investment is because, unlike the Chinese, we did not have the infrastructural investment, we did not have the skills level that they had, and the other indices that attracted American investments to go to China. How can Africa leverage on these? Do we have the requisite educational policies? Are we still going to go by the business as usual model, where there are some things where businesses do not want to talk about? In Ghana, I belong to a CEO platform where nobody talks about politics, but the politics provides the ecosystem in which investment survives, in which business survives. And the idea that politics represents a risk, that businessmen do not want to talk about politics, is one of the most, for me, confusing things that I've ever experienced, because when the chaos comes, it engulfs everyone, and business cannot survive, as it's happening today in Sudan. With the chaos in Sudan, nobody can do business. So businessmen must begin recognizing the reality that, unfortunately, the painful political truth, which may come as a cost, because if you speak about it, sometimes you lose business, sometimes you don't get the contract, and people are uncomfortable with this, and I understand. But it's a trade-off that sometimes we would have to carefully negotiate and balance ourselves against. I'll just stop talking here. Lawyers are not good at speaking for short periods, so let me just... So unfortunately, I couldn't touch on the regulatory things, but the regulatory, we're still evolving. I'll just state that. We're still evolving. I think we haven't done badly. These days, countries like Ghana, Nigeria, many other countries in Africa, they put in place proper regulatory structures. Fortunately, we have not tightened many of them because we are all competing for investment. And because we are competing for investment, in some places there's what has been called the race to the bottom, where everyone is dismantling regulatory structures just to minimize things and allow you to come in. But we still have overall systemic problems. And the ease of doing business, if you go on that ranking, the World Bank's ranking of ease of doing business in the world, you would see that many of the countries on the bottom rungs are Africa. And it's not necessarily because we have the tightest investment rules, but it's because the way things are structured and deployed, including the cost of doing business, which is the aspect of corruption, the fact that you have the rent seeking, the fact that you have to pay people along the way, and all that. All these contribute to the ease of doing business that makes nonsense, even of good regulatory risk, regulatory rules. You can have the best regulatory rules. The reality is, I'm supposed to sign this document, and I'll tell you I'll sign it, but I never sign it. So on paper, the rules are beautiful, but on the ground, we still have ways of going about these, negotiating ourselves around these to ensure that people are frustrated. And I think that's what the doctor was talking about earlier. Some of these, I think, when we're able to overcome them, I think we'll do well. But the investment picture and the economic picture in Africa, the outlook is overall good. There are just underlying undercurrents that needs to be, we have to approach it, beyond the beautiful conversation. That's the point I was making, that we all know the truth. That's the truth. We all know the things. We just have to approach it accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A round of applause for Professor Ernest Kofi Abochi. Beautiful submission there, and we'll be wrapping up the conversation now. And Prof, good you touched on the issue of the regulation, because our next speaker will delve much deeper into that. And just before then, let's put our hands together even as they take their seats. Thank you very much, Dr. Sam. Thank you, Professor Ernest Abochi, and thanks to Mr. Edward Latte, who is Director, Investor Services at the Ghana Investment Promotion Center.